Hi, I'm Liz Cully, and welcome back to Cool, Cool, Cool. Each week, I give you a glimpse into what I think is cool and chat with a ton of people that are definitely cool. No topic is off bounds unless I guess it's not cool. Welcome to Cool, Cool, Cool.
I worked for, when I got out of school, I worked for the BBC and I produced for the BBC on American, a news magazine program about arts and culture. And
That's cool. And so
Yeah.
you were on camera like, hello, today.
No, I was not a presenter. I was interviewing people.
Oh. Oh boy, that makes me really nervous now. I didn't know you were a professional interviewer for the BBC. That's big time. The BBC is the real deal.
It was interesting. It was cool. When I left there, I actually left there to do that movie I shot Andy Warhol. My colleague, was writing it and invited me to write it with her, Mary Herron. And when I said goodbye to everybody at the office, do you remember Alistair Cook? There was a thing, it's probably before your time. There was a thing called Masterpiece Theatre, and there was this old British dude.
Do I remember Masterpiece Theatre? Yes, Dan, I do.
And I got to know him, and I said, Alistair, it was so nice getting to know you, and I hope we'll stay in touch. And he said, well, give my regards to your father. And I was like, that's weird. Like, my father's been dead for years. He thought I was Daniel Minahan's son. So I think maybe I kind of got the job.
Because he thought you were
like
Daniel.
Imaginary nepotism.
Wait, that's hilarious. Of course I remember Masterpiece Theater. In fact, something that has seared into my memory was Rumpelstiltskin. And the person playing Rumpelstiltskin was the guy from The Love Boat.
Whoa, that's good casting.
What? I don't remember what his name is from the original Love Boat. Do you know?
Hervé something.
That guy.
Yeah.
Terrifying. Spooked me out as a kid. But Shelley Duvall.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah.
Yes, Dan. I
great.
watched a lot of Masterpiece Theater. What a throwback. I mean, is that a nugget of such crazy work that I just didn't expect to find. And
I did not work on Masterpiece Theater. I worked on a series called The Late Show, and where I did profiles of artists and writers.
That's cool.
And yeah.
But it's Masterpiece
But
Theater
we were all in the
adjacent.
same office,
You, and I'm going to fudge what he had said. My darling former colleague and dear friend, David Canfield from Vanity Fair, wrote a lovely piece about you saying that you were really I'm going to overextend, but this is what I gleaned from it, the king of prestige television, the director who has really been involved in some of the most wonderful, what we call high prestige television. How does that feel?
The piece that David did was like shocking. I was like, wow, that's me. But he asked me so many questions. I didn't know which way he was going to go with the profile. We had Fellow Travelers coming out, and he did that great interview, and he went deep.
He went deep.
Yeah, he really, I started in the indie world on I Shot Andy Warhol, which I co-wrote with Mary Herron, the director. And then I wrote and directed a film called Series 7. And my manager introduced me, set up a meeting with me with Alan Ball and Alan Poole, the creator and producer of that series. And I booked it. And it turned out that my movie was like this kind of cult movie and favorite in the writer's room. And that kind of set me off into the world of HBO. And shortly after that, I worked with David Milch on Deadwood.
Huge. I love Deadwood.
Like
deeply. Because I love the cowboy. Like, honestly, I'm just a city slicker trapped in Glendale.
Yeah. I mean, that was amazing because it was a huge production, but it was also the anti-Western Western.
Right.
And I learned so much working with him and so much working with Alan Ball. I worked with both of them for years. And so that was my big push. And then later on, I went to work with David Benioff and Dan Weiss on Game of Thrones. And so I've always been attracted to writers. Like I get crushes on writers, like, work crushes, like, these people. It's just the difference between working on something that's great and something that's middling. And knock on wood, so far I haven't at least intentionally worked on anything that was.
You have a pretty diesel IMDb resume.
I
That's
know.
what
I
I
wish
mean.
I
It's
could
like,
edit it a little bit.
really? Why? It's like 6 Feet Under, Deadwood the movie. I'm going to even forget the L Word, Game of Thrones, Fellow Travelers, Halston, which I want to talk about in a minute, which you were also showrunner. I mean, I'm probably forgetting so many things. What else am I forgetting? So many. I mean, just really, but television shows that I've really the heyday of HBO. But what's so interesting about what I would assume each episode of those shows is they are an hour and it feels like you're almost making a movie every single episode. Does it sort of feel like that?
Yeah, I treat them with the same, commitment that I would anything of my own, anything else. And I do sort of consider them my own. I mean, I think the contribution that directors make is vast. We're not always so appreciated in series, but I was able to become the guy that, that people wanted to come in and kind of, and then I started producing.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's funny because the movie that I made that brought me into the world of series was about a reality TV show. And then it was sort of like my good fortune that I started working in series almost exclusively after that until here we are.
Until here we are. How do you keep continuity in a series when you do have multiple directors? Like sometimes you'll come in and I saw you'll do like 8 episodes or True Blood. How could I forget True Blood? Duh. Very gay, very amazing, very vampire, all the vampires. But you do a ton of episodes for a series, or maybe like Game of Thrones, or I guess you were season 1 Game of Thrones, right?
Season 1 and season 3.
3. Okay, so that's a perfect example. Like you come in the beginning and then you come in later. How does a series as the viewer, like we don't know that there are different directors every episode. Like how do you keep it all? Like do you get a little notebook from the director before that's like, I changed this color? How does that work?
No, I think in a good series, the lead director will set the look of the show. On Game of Thrones, I was actually involved in setting the look of the show because there was another version of it that yeah.
There was another version. What do you mean another version?
Yeah, Tim Van Patten and I reshot a lot of the first episode. And it was very different. I don't remember the name of the director, but it was sort of looked like a live action fairy tale. And so we just wanted to kind of really dirty it up and make it what it should have been.
Yes.
And so someone comes in, they set the look of the show, and then your job as a director is to honor that. When I work as a producing director, or if, like, for example, on Fellow Travelers, I set the look of the show. Ron Neiswander and I, hired everybody, hired all the creatives. We had our references. I created a lookbook for it, which sort of became a Bible for the show visually, and some rules about how we were going to shoot stuff. And then I hired the other directors.
Okay.
And then, you just kind of keep them in line.
Got it.
Between the cinematographers and the writer that's on set, you have them kind of watching to make sure the writer makes sure the tone of it's correct and that we're telling the story correctly and the performances are in line. And then besides the director, there's also the cinematographer who's,
right.
Has this there's this sort of gentleman's agreement that we're going to keep it going.
Right.
I learned from the best. I learned from Alan Ball and Ellen Poole on 6 Feet Under, which had a very rigorous Bible. We only use these lenses, we use these wide lenses, and then we don't use middle range lenses, and then we use these telephoto lenses. It was that specific, and just guidelines for how things were blocked. And I carried that forward. I really put that forward. Like when I went to do House of Cards, I was brought in to produce a season of that, and my job was to bring it back to what Fincher had done. And so I was in dialogue with David. As we were shooting, he would watch my dailies. I set off I think it was the third or fourth season. I can't recall now. we kind of brought it back to his original intention because it
Right.
had kind of gone off into something else.
Yeah,
Things
it did
happen.
veer. Yeah, and then you kind of have to bring it back. I mean, you've worked with some of the most celebrated and up and coming, as we have seen with On Swift Horses, which is your newest movie, which we will get to, during your career. I mean, Ewan McGregor in Halston. I mean, just it's crazy, the actors that you've worked with. What is it like? Okay, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this question. What is more challenging, working with an up and coming actor that maybe you've never worked with or is really finding their footing in television or film, or working with someone who's like really been around and done it?
I've had both experiences, and both can be really great and both can be problematic.
Right.
When I feel like somebody is not getting it, it's usually because they're afraid.
Like to really go there on set.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or something's holding them back, or so my job is sort of like to make them want to be there.
I mean, you're
and
very convincing.
And find that thing.
And how do you do that? Like, is it you take them to the side, you spend time with people? Like, how do you get, like, do you do that? Do you try to meet all the actors beforehand and get to know them first, or?
Yeah, I usually meet people, like I'll have a meeting with them, even if I'm going in, on a show like on Ray Donovan. I had this very specific, I loved that writer, Ann Bitterman, and showrunner, and I went in and I met with Liev. I was like, listen, we have to talk. This is a very complicated episode, and people don't take the time to do that.
Yeah.
And so it really paid off. You get to know people, and it's on a series, it's sort of like it's the ultimate substitute teacher job. You come in and these people are up and running and they feel like they know what they're doing, and you have to come in and kind of like go with the flow with them.
Sure.
And so that's interesting. Some people want you to be their, big brother. Some people want you to be their dad. Some people want you to be their son. It's like this kind of very, very intimate kind of transference that goes
Sure.
on with the director.
Yeah, because you're really leading. I mean, you are behind the camera, right? There's a lot of people on set, but you're the one in control.
And they have to trust you.
And they have to trust you.
Yeah. So, sometimes young people can be really difficult because they're afraid. They're afraid of doing the wrong thing, or,
Sure.
sometimes older people or, more experienced people, they've worked, they've not worked.
Right.
They're glad to be working again, or, or somehow they feel insecure about something about it. And you're just kind of like finding that thing, making them feel great, making them feel invested, and my job is to get the best out of everybody, not just the actors, but, the crew and the cinematographer and the writers.
You've done obviously a lot of original screenplay work, adapted on Swift Horses from, material that people know. But what was it like working on Halston, where you're bringing a real person and their story to life?
Halston was my passion project. I had originally optioned the book with Christine Vachon, the producer, like 20 years before.
Oh.
And it was right in the beginning of my career. And we came very close to producing it several times. The difficulty of that story in particular is that it was to tell the story of what was incredible about this artist, what corrupted this artist, and how, he was destroyed, really required to tell the whole story. And that didn't fit easily into 90 minutes. And to her credit, Christine came to me 20 years later and said, hey, that book's available again. What do you think of doing it as a limited series now that you're doing so much series? And I was like, that's brilliant, because we could spend 5 or 6 hours really going there and really moving through time. And, she suggested, well, what if we get Ewan? And I was like, do you think?
Where did that come? Why did she think Ewan for him, though?
She had a good experience with Ewan years ago, and they had been looking for something to do together. They did Velvet Goldmine together with Todd,
Got it.
and I met with him. It was one of those. We're at the same agency. They, I thought I was going to meet with him and probably like a table full of agents, and they just had a room with some snacks in it and some drinks in it, and they put us in this beautiful conference room, and I sat there, and he came in, and I had all of, I'd been thinking about this for 20 years. Even when I put it aside and let it go, I still, like, from time to time, I'd be at the flea market and I'd be like, oh my God, that's a Halston. I should buy it. How much is it? And I like had this trove of stuff.
Oh my God,
And
next
so
time, please buy it and call me, because let me tell you, I've got 3 vintage Halston pieces
that's
and they are
great.
like pristine in plastic
Yeah.
and were very expensive. So yes, I hope you
So
have
I
the
brought
treasure
all of
trove.
these images, and interestingly, Ewan responds to photography.
Okay.
He got a lot from this. And I think it's the first time he's played a real person. In Velvet Goldmine, he
Mm,
was kind of playing Iggy Pop, but it wasn't really Iggy Pop.
right.
Um, this was a momentous meeting for me. I was like, oh my God, like if I don't, and by the end of the meeting, he agreed. So we talked about it. He asked a lot of questions. And I brought a dress that he could see and kind of open up, and we turned it inside out, and we looked at it and explained to him how he worked and how it was made. So that was an incredible experience, and really like an alignment of the planets. We brought it to Ewan, Christine, and the team and I went out and pitched it everywhere. And I had just done the assassination of Gianni Versace, as I produced it with Ryan. And when they found out that we were out pitching it, he was like, I've wanted to do that story forever. You have to come and bring it here with me. And
It feels very Ryan Murphy.
he was the one who was crazy enough to do it and really, entrusted. We had a great experience on the assassination of Gianni Versace.
What a fun thing to shoot also. I mean, I'm, Andrew Cunanan, the story. I'm born and raised in San Francisco, so for me, you know what I mean? It's a story
Local
that
hero.
I just always was like, this guy's fucking crazy. But also, it's Versace. Like as a kid of the 90s, like it was, that was such a cultural, moment in fashion, but also his murder and, all of it. But what fun sets from
That was crazy.
Versace to Halston. That apartment in Halston with those is that a real apartment?
That was going to be so challenging because to build that was going to be an insane amount of
Yeah, like
money.
a couple $100,000.
It's a famous apartment that was designed by Paul Rudolph, the brutalist architect. It wasn't built for Halston. It was built for this Texan family who had that as their pied-à-terre in New York. Halston bought it and brought Paul Rudolph in to restore it to his original. They had done some changes to it. I had the good fortune of interviewing Paul Rudolph, the architect, before he died. And when we were going to do this as a movie. And he gave me great insights into Halston, who had like the greatest respect for his design and wanted everything done to his, exacting. Paul Rudolph was a very controversial figure. He was the dean of architecture at Yale, built the brutalist library that's still there, and which he was so reviled and it was so controversial that the students burned it down, and then it was rebuilt.
Whoa.
He was a really interesting person. That set was built within an existing home in Brooklyn that was in sort of this beautiful home that was built into a warehouse. We built that floating staircase, kind of foreshortened it, put in the kind of Pullman kitchen in the back. And it's a very good, and it's about a third wider than the real one. And the
It's
incredible
crazy.
production designer was going to make it narrow. I was like, no, we're going to need the space. We can shoot it to look smaller.
Right.
Because it was like, can you imagine a crew walking around on these carpets? It's like,
No.
it was an amazing experience. The other thing that his name is Mark Ricker built was the Olympic Tower showroom,
Which was crazy.
that was a complete build with like, 20-foot mirrored cantilevered doors.
Yeah.
It was
The
it was
set,
like being there.
that's what I mean. I mean, it's just that show was just incredibly shot. Was there anything from set that you took?
Well, I do have one of the sofas in my apartment in New York.
One of the sofas from that apartment?
Yeah, which was used several times. It was used in the Olympic Tower. It was used in his apartment. It was used in his house in Montauk. And I just have like a fragment of it in there. And
It's pretty good.
yeah, it's a nice memory of it. And
When things are really successful, you feel so transformed into those spaces. Sure, we've all watched wonderful things that have, been shot on a long alleyway and like God knows it's behind the lot and like who
Right.
cares. But when you're really trying to put yourself into the world of a visionary like Halston or Gianni Versace and the color, like even just the saturation of the color of Versace was so intense. It felt very 90s in this way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It felt electric.
Yeah.
And same thing with Halston. It was just so good. Did anyone from his life reach out afterward and say, "Oh, you got this right," or "You got
Well,
this
it's
wrong"?
interesting. There are some people. One of the Halstonettes, his models, was helpful to us with the costume designer and very supportive, and loaned us things to look at. We actually had his tailor, who made Halston's clothing, come and make Ewan's, his pants and
He kept
and
all that,
jacket.
I'm sure.
I can't say, but we wear the same size, so I did get a few of his hand-me-downs.
Good.
But we had this tailor who worked with Halston, and tailors are like rock stars in the fashion world.
Big time.
So this guy had the patterns and knew how to do the construction.
Whoa.
And Ewan actually worked with him.
Cool.
He wanted to know he studied him and wanted to know how he handled things and made things. And Ewan made stuff
That's
of his
cool.
own on his own time. And, it was that level of commitment in that project. And you're creating the world of someone who recreated the world,
Correct.
and so we couldn't really fake it. I had this amazing costume designer who Jariana San Juan, who also did On Swift Horses with me.
Oh,
She's this virtuosic designer, and we had a great time.
and really understands period. I mean, because to get it right, you've got to lean in and get it right. You've done so much queer, iconic television and now film, from the L Word. Game of Thrones, I would consider queer, but that's rather here nor there. Fellow Travelers, Halston, Fellow Travelers, I think, felt really important and different. I think it was interesting. I, was speaking very heavily to the studio at the time that Fellow Travelers was coming out from an FYC perspective. And I really loved that they had come to me as a queer woman in Hollywood, I guess, in FYC space. And we're like, what do you think? Like, what would you do? We have the AIDS blanket, like all of these things. And that is so rare in, that I see in, from a marketing campaign, people really understanding it. But while it was, tons of sex and really, fun at times, but also very sad, it felt very true. What was it like directing Fellow Travelers? What was that? Was it really emotional the whole time? Like, because obviously you're filming things out of order, what was that like?
Yeah. I set it up with Ron in Toronto, and recreating Washington, Fire Island, and San Francisco in Toronto is
all of it was
impossible.
in Toronto.
Yes. It was almost impossible, but we found this incredible production designer and team up there and brought in some people from New York. But, it's interesting that you say important, because that was the word that we forbid people to use.
Well,
I'll tell you why.
Well,
because we didn't want it to have a kind of portent about it,
mm,
that it was like, oh my God, we're doing something important. I was always looking in that project for moments of joy for the characters,
right.
like levity, like was there a way, because they still, would have had fun, like that house party
The house
and
party's insane in Fire Island. Is that the
yeah.
one you're talking about?
Well, the house party that the girls have, and
Oh,
they
yes.
invite, Johnny Bailey to
Yes.
to that party, and they have a boy there who, they fix him up with,
Yeah.
you know, that was one of the few times when they actually get to have a good time,
Yeah, that's
you
true.
know?
I guess the Fire Island party was like dark and twisted at the end. But,
Yeah.
well, listen, I think for me, it felt important because I grew up in San Francisco in the 90s watching cousins and family friends just get ravished by AIDS.
Yeah.
Like, as a kid, I'll never forget going to this little church over, like right before you hit the sunset. Uh, and it was unfortunately for my cousin, and they played Mariah Carey and Boys to Men. You know that like song that they did, and
Oh
I'll never
God.
forget it. And I wore a limited 2 black and white striped dress with Steve Madden, Mary Jane's. I was like really hoping that all of his friends thought I was great. And I just remember being in this room, and it was cool that, it was great that my parents took us because,
Yeah.
he meant a lot to my mom. But that's kind of shit like sears in your
Yeah.
memory as a kid.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people don't really understand what happened. So for me,
Yeah.
it felt like watching a series that was not only really interesting from the politics side. I wasn't really privy to any of that, and I liked the love story intertwining. And Matthew Bromer, I think, did a great job of this, like, double life situation and really wrestling with that. And I think he did a wonderful job, and so did Jonathan Bailey. I mean, the acting was great, but it was also great to really see what was happening to that community and people who weren't there realizing, like when Matthew Bromer was like, oh shit, when he went to San Francisco and saw it all. That's why
Yeah.
I feel like I was like, oh, this is pretty accurate,
Yeah. I know we as luckily there are tram tracks in
There are.
Toronto.
Actually, I was just going to ask you about that because I'm like, oh, but there are like cable cars in
Yeah.
Toronto.
That project, when Ron Nicewaner and I had been looking for something to do together for a while, like I would send him a book or he would send me a book or a script, and we'd be like, maybe not. And then he called me, he's like, no, this is the one. And I read it and I fell in love with it. But I really felt, I was surprised that I didn't know that much about the Lavender Scare.
Really?
Yeah.
I guess me too.
It was
That's what
sort
I
of
mean.
a footnote.
It does feel like a bit of a footnote. And when I was watching it, because I'm a nerd, well, I told you the other day, I watched most of it. Basically, I watched 2 episodes at home, and then I watched all of the rest of the episodes on a flight from Rome to Los Angeles next to this lovely couple who was like, whoa, because there's a lot of sex
Yeah.
in Fellow Travelers.
Yeah.
Like a lot of sex. And it's not just like a little sex, it's like sex. It's
Yeah.
like gay guys sex,
Yeah.
For my little lesbian self, I'm like, whoa, that's a lot of sex. But I had Googled before. I'm like, God, was this like really going down with McCarthyism? Like I had, what I
Yeah.
mean? I was like, whoa, this is
like concurrent to the
crazy.
Red Scare.
All accurate. It was just nuts.
Yeah, they persecuted and destroyed the lives of thousands of government workers, in that time. Anyone who didn't, was not sympathetic to them, they were going to get rid of.
Sure.
So I thought it was so brilliant that he was making the parallel of these people being gay and lesbian people being persecuted in the 1950s, and then the basic genocide of people of gay men in the 1980s who are dying of AIDS.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really beautiful and such a smart, kind of paradigm he set up. And I wanted in immediately. Having lived through that, I moved to New York when I was 18 to go to art school. And you get to New, like I'd been waiting my whole life to get to New York. And it was like, don't touch anyone. don't use the same towels, don't drink out of the same cup. Like it was this like terror. And then I watched people around me just drop. And I really felt like, having had that experience, I really felt like I could really bring something to this project.
Well,
And so that
you
was,
felt it because it felt exactly like that complete terror and urgency and unknown and confusion was there, at that time.
I
And it was
remember
also
thinking maybe I would live to be 30.
really,
As a gay guy, I felt like a time bomb because they didn't know, how long is the incubation period of this disease, or does it take, so like any intimacy that you had was terrifying. And then, but it seemed like you could already have it. So I it was a very strange way to come of age. And
well, and where did you grow up?
in suburban Connecticut.
I assume closeted, or were you not? You were pretty
It
open.
was like an open secret.
How were your parents about it?
At first, I think they were kind of shocked by it, and then it's what it was.
Sure.
And I went to art school, and then I went to, like I was
Yeah.
always like in the arts and theater.
But I guess even with a level of acceptance from your parents, I think generally it still probably wasn't very accepted. So to not be able to express yourself as a teenager, probably to the extent that you would want to, and like most teenagers do, then going to art school and just feeling like a whole nother level of shame and
Yeah.
terror, it's just like, oh my God, like it's just compounded.
It was intense. Yeah.
It was intense. But I bet the partying was real good in New York.
It did.
At that time.
That's the part. That's back to the joy of it.
Yeah.
And I feel like, if anything, if people take away anything from Fellow Travelers, it's like, queer people find each other.
Well,
Like we're going to find each other. There's going to be community. It's going to happen, even if it's going to happen in a secret house party,
Well, great segue, Dan, to On Swift Horses, which is your newest film where queer people, no matter what, do find each other in any way, even if they're running away from it, they come back. You have, I think, Gen Z darling heartthrob, the Dylan McKay, if you will, of Gen Z, Jacob Elordi. You have Daisy, who is we were just discussing, really like on the rise to be, probably one of the largest actresses, I think, of the millennial Gen Z age. Very beautiful film. Very beautiful film. And really, I got so many people at the screening that we were both at this week had texted me afterward, and they're like, I didn't know what I was going in for, and I just didn't realize how stunningly beautiful, complicated, like I laughed, I cried, I felt very horny. I'm like, yep, I know. But what a beautiful thing to have done, and really kind of the first film you've done in some time.
Yeah. If you don't count the
Deadwood
movie. Yeah.
I mean, we count the Deadwood,
Okay.
but still, that's been some time, I suppose.
Yeah.
You got the book, you sent it to Peter, your producing partner, or how did it come together?
Yeah. Peter and I knew each other socially. I think we were at the same agency and at UTA. And at one point he came to me and he said, wouldn't you like to do another movie? And I was like, yeah, I would. It was sort of like I think there was a time, it was probably during lockdown. Like I woke up one day and I was like, wow, I've been doing everybody else's homework for the last, 15 years. Like I should probably try to write something. And Peter started sending me stuff. He visited me and we were in lockdown in Provincetown. And there were things that like this didn't hit, that didn't hit. I don't know anything. Like this was like a French speaking thing. I don't think I could do that. Like we're back and forth. And then we were both sent Shannon Puffel's novel On Swift Horses. And I just poured, I think I read it in 2 days, and I'm a very slow reader. And I called him. I was like, okay. And I think I wasn't even quite finished with it yet. And I called him. I was like, I think this is it. And he's like, I just read that too. He's like, I love it. And so we spent the rest of lockdown talking about it. Peter reached out to Shannon Pufal, and we were able to option the novel. And she's this remarkable person. She teaches creative writing at Stanford. And this was her first novel. And I knew this writer, Bryce Cass, that I introduced to Peter, who we got to adapt it with. And and then it just started to roll that way. And then, Peter brought in financiers. We started thinking about cast, and it just got like momentum in a very, I think it occupied a lot of people during lockdown.
Yeah, well, and that's nice because people had the time to really pay attention. How did Daisy Edgar-Jones come into play for the lead role of Muriel?
Peter's partner used to represent her,
Okay.
Brian Swartstrom, at UTA, and she's a UTA person. And Peter was like, "What about Daisy?" And I said, "Well, I love normal people.
Yeah.
Like if she seems fearless and can kind of take this very internal character and very seemingly unsympathetic character and made her really compelling." And he said, "I think you should see this movie." And they sent me a link to that movie she did called Fresh, which is one of the more shocking
I don't think I've seen
horror
that.
films.
Oh, it's a horror film? We talked about, I don't like horror films.
It's really cool. It's very
Okay,
political. Fine. It's very smart. It starts
There's
off
a lot
as
of blood and guts.
Oh, yeah. But you don't necessarily see it. It's suggested. But
like I'm having a hard time with The Pit right now. Like I watch The Pit like this and I peer in and I peer out,
It's not like that. It's different from that. Plus I just close my eyes when that kind of stuff comes up.
Fair enough.
I'm not a fan of it either. I used to love horror. Now I'm like, but she was so remarkable in that film. And we got her to read the script, and she wanted to do it. And it just kind of, the cast kind of came together from there.
It's funny because you did cast this during lockdown, where I'm sure a lot of it was on Zoom. So you're trying to get a feel for people on Zoom, and probably a lot of phone calls, text, FaceTime. What was doing chemistry tests like on Zoom?
Well, it's interesting because we did that also in Fellow Travelers. We had a chemistry test people on video. Peter says that we did chemistry reads on Zoom, but we did not. We did a couple, but for example, we read a few people with Jacob for the role of Henry. We did it in person. We just swabbed the hell out of everybody for
Oh yeah, did it in a parking lot.
Yeah, basically. And then, so we read a couple of guys with Jacob, to see who would work. I knew that I wanted Diego from the start, and then eventually
Diego won.
Yeah, I persevered, and it helped that Babylon came out, and he was the lead in opposite, Margot Robbie. And then with Daisy, we did do chemistry reads on Zoom, and Sasha was just such a star.
I mean, that's so hard to do, though. Yeah, Sasha is a true star. I also liked that in the film, we do dive. I mean, not to give it all away, you should watch it. But I liked that, they were having this Julius and Muriel were having, obviously different, quote, coming of ages, but they were sort of experiencing very similar things through class, through, being with Latino American Latinx folks, like in their own right. Like it was very interesting that they were really having this sort of like dual life from a distance, but still connected so deeply through their love. It was interesting.
It's very unique. I mean, the book's very internal. It has a lot to do with like recollection and memory, and so a lot of it was really bringing all of that out and giving them voices. the thing that made me want to adapt this novel was the idea that these two people really kind of fall in love,
Yes.
and it's a bit of a misdirect in the beginning. You think she's in love with her brother-in-law, but really they just recognize each other and they're allies. And he knows she's a gambler and she's fascinated with his independence and the way he lives without, any rules. He's fascinated with the idea that she belongs somewhere and she has a home.
Yeah.
He's trying to create that with Henry, and she's trying to create an escape plan to get out into the world. And, it's so unique because it's like a gay man and queer woman fall in love. And I thought like, wow,
Yeah.
like I've never seen that before. And people get it.
People get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Though I'm sure there are probably some idiot heterosexual cis man out there who will watch and be like, see, she's bisexual, when she has the dream about being with him, like, I knew she could be turned. It's like, oh God, but I really loved it because, even speaking about fellow travelers, like finding your people, that on Swift Horses, I think really did that. It really reminded me of when I started to see myself in others and really, they say when your friends become family, that's kind of what it evoked for me, their love. Because, for me, I have a complicated family relationship and my friends, I do love them like deeply, deeply, and also the heartbreak of when somebody knows you so well or can see you and you love so much, that's awful. Like when she finds out, Julia's kind of said an offhand comment about her,
Right.
it just broke her, because it stings when it's from someone who you think you can really trust and rely on and love.
Yeah.
Again, kind of calling back to a lot of the emotional connection that we saw in a lot of your previous work, but also in Fellow Travelers. I love the last scene of the film where Julius is, in a bar searching on kind of, a calling card board, if you will. I don't know why I can't think of the right terminology.
We call it the dead letter board. But
dead letter board. Thank you.
Okay. Shannon Pufall made that term up.
But it's this beautiful moment. And you see it with Muriel, but you do a wonderful thing where we can't see the board until we see it through Julius's eyes. And it's all these pictures and letters and notes from people looking for either lovers or families or friends and, et cetera. And that really, made me emotional because it made me think about, again, how our community is so tight-knit and deep. And if it needs to be secretive and underground, we will find a way to support each other. What was it like creating that board?
The board was also the thing I don't know that I've ever cried reading a novel before this. And when the board, when he finds his name on the board and realizes that Muriel's looking for him and Henry's looking for him, it's incredibly touching and it's so important. And I feel like in the production meetings, I really made it clear to everyone how important this board was. And when we got to set, the board was about as big as that monitor. And I was like, where's the rest of it? And they were
Someone's
like, what do you
getting
mean?
Fired. No.
And so, no, the set decorators and the production designer killed it. But there was a moment where we're like, okay, let's push that scene later. Everybody who, I need 3 different people with different kinds of handwriting. You write this, you write that. We had all these things and we had photographs. They had files of photographs, but we just built it out. And, it was a gamble, but it worked,
Yeah.
And I did pick up a few extra things, and there are people that I've lost that are on the board, friends, there's family members. There's this really camp picture of my dad, which is so priceless. Other crew members' families' pictures are up there. And, The thing that inspired it for me was I remembered seeing this documentary about Haight-Ashbury in the 60s, in the late 60s. And there were boards up where people, like people's kids would just disappear. They're
Yeah.
like, I'm going to Haight-Ashbury. I'm going to go find my happiness and fuck all this.
Yeah.
And so there are these there's this film footage of these boards with like, some girl in her high school yearbook, like, she
Yeah.
probably doesn't look like that at all now,
Nope.
but these people, these families were searching for their kids. And not just that, but, I also thought of when, I live in New York after September 11th, when people would post, there would be like, there was like this chain link fence that just went on for miles of people like looking for people,
Yeah.
and so it really reminded me of that. Also missed connections.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just thought there was something so beautiful about it. And we got there.
Yeah.
We started off with a little tiny
Square and you
rendition
got
of it, but we got there. And I think it really works. And Jacob just really brought it in that scene. And, it's movie magic.
It is movie magic. I mean, I cannot have this episode without talking about the gayest and most favorite scene of mine, which is the very, 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 very last scene where a beautiful horse out of nowhere arrives, saddled, and then gets ridden by Jacob Elordi into the fucking sunset to Reno. And I was just like, what? If this wasn't a gay movie, now it is the gayest movie.
Yeah.
I just loved it.
He brings but he does bring, it doesn't come out of nowhere. He brings the horse
I know,
to
I'm just
Muriel.
saying,
He's kind of like, giving her a little,
Yeah.
he's teasing her a little bit. He brings her this gift of a horse that he probably won in a card game.
Yeah.
He brings it to the house. He thinks they have a ranch, but
They
it's
do
just a
not.
ranch house in a housing development. And so they're stuck with this horse, which gets away from them.
Right.
And so in my mind, that horse has just been wandering around the housing development, hasn't quite gone feral, but,
No, it got ridden.
with the saddle and the tack, okay, that's movie magic.
That was real.
In the novel, he rides a bareback into the sunrise.
Because what was so funny is that I actually paused it for a moment and was like, oh, he must be riding that bareback, which is crazy. That must hurt. I ride, so I know. And then I look, I'm like, no, he's like, this horse is like completely bridled and saddled like perfectly. I mean, this is hysterical, but I did really love it. A lot of the things that you've done, while there are humorous and comedic moments and moments of levity, especially I would say like L Word or even House of Cards in some twisted way, is comedy something that's of interest to you?
Yes. Very much. I mean, I think, human behavior is funny.
Yeah.
I like observational humor. I don't like mean-spirited humor, but
No.
I like,
Shit show now that I feel like we all have to laugh at something, and that's one of the biggest reliefs of pain, especially for the queer community, is laughter. And since you've really made some of the most beautiful queer film and television, it would only make sense that you go into the ha-ha-has,
Don't make me sing.
Do you want to? Little cabaret, if you will.
No, I think, as outsiders, we see the absurdity of, life and conformity and human behavior and,
Religion.
Like invented.
Just kidding.
Political satire is dead. There's no possibility anymore of political satire,
No. Our names are all going to be posted up on a board and that's it.
Well, no, I also think it's almost like I honestly think they stopped making House of Cards because how would you satirize that?
I know.
The other problem is by satirizing that, and I'm not going to say what that is, you only give it more power.
I agree. Well, and
that's
agree.
like a, like energy vampire
Correct.
people.
It's true. It is true. It is true. I've loved talking to you. Not